Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Adam Fleming and Justin Fike, because that's our names. And we're going to talk a little bit today about setup. Setup is just basically means how do you have your environment ready to write so that you can sit down and write. There's the possibilities for setup are probably as wide and varied as there are people on this earth. So we're not going to tell you how to set up your environment because we don't know. But we know that you know. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go here. A couple of things to think about. Justin, what's the first thing that you think of when you think of setup?
When I think of setup, the very first thing I think of is physical surroundings. Like, what are the details of my physical surroundings? And then immediately after that, I think of kind of my structure and resources and being prepared ahead of time so that I'm not wasting time figuring out what I'm doing when I'm sitting down to get ready to write. But maybe we can talk about what those look like for both of us. When you're getting ready to do a writing session, Adam, where do you tend to be physically?
Physically, I like to get out of the home office. There's just a, if an email comes in and I need to print something off, the printer is here. But if I'm at the coffee house, the printer's not there. So I shouldn't even be looking at email. So that's not to say that I never write at home. I actually do, but it actually works a lot better when it's late at night. My kids are asleep. My wife goes to bed. And, if I'm wired up on coffee for some reason because I had it too late in the afternoon, my setup could just be a blanket over my lap, the laptop on an easy chair, and off I go. So ideally, I've got a larger chunk of time where I know I'm not going to be interrupted. That's the other thing that happens in the home office during the day is I could get interrupted about any number of things. I have 4 children and a wife in the house. So anything could happen. I like to leave my phone off to the side and not look at it. I might take it to the coffee house, but I'm going to put it on mute. You don't want your phone ringing in the coffee house anyway, and I just want to kind of clear space. That doesn't mean that I don't have the internet on. It might not be a bad idea to have the internet off, but sometimes I'll be writing along and I'll go, I need to know about the geology of Oklahoma. Bam, internet. So having the internet available is this sort of catch-22 quandary because you can really get lost in it. And then 3 hours later, you're like, wow, I screwed around a lot. I wasted the session. But on the other hand, you have to research stuff if you want to put together a fictional world that feels good. So the coffee house isn't the place for everybody because there is a hum about it. Now I've got these earbuds, for this call, and I also will, just pull up the internet and throw some music on. When people see the earbuds, I live in a small enough town that on any given day, I'm in the coffee shop. I'm going to see 20 people come and go who I know, and I have good friendships with. But when they see me with the earbuds in, typically they respect that distance and won't interrupt. Or if they do, they know you're working and this, hey, just want to say hi. Okay, hi, see you later. I'm working. And that usually helps. So my setup is in a small town coffee shop. That's the basic. How about you, Justin?
Yeah, I tend to like to stay in, but I have learned for myself that I have to find a spot in the house that I don't use for other stuff. So I can't sit on the couch in the same place that I sit and watch TV because psychologically it puts me in that same space and I can't tune in enough. So we have a guest room and there's a nice comfy chair in there and it's almost always, unless we have guests, there's no one in it. And it's really easy for me to just kind of go in there. I like to sit in a chair and have my sweatpants on and have a cup of coffee and that kind of thing. So to me, it's helpful to be in my own environment because for some reason that equates to not being interrupted. Because if I'm out around a lot of people, I feel like I get distracted more easily. But again, that's the number one thing that I think both Adam and I are saying. The subtext of everything we're saying about setup is this is for us. There is no such thing as a prescriptive setup for anybody. But this is what it's looked like for us, and maybe that'll help you start to clue in on what that looks like for you. So for me, I like to be home, but this actually kind of leads me on to another thing that I think is really important in setup, Adam, that you were actually getting at as well in your point, which is sort of social expectations. And one of the things that I think, especially for sort of newer writers, if you don't have something finished yet that you feel like you can point to, you may not have gotten to the point yet where you're confident enough to tell people, I am working on a book, or I am working on a project, or I'm doing this thing that's really important to me and I need time and space to do that. Maybe even the people that you live with a lot, like a spouse or, you know, close friends, family members, that sort of thing. So one of the things I think is really important to mention in terms of setup is define what you're doing and let the people in your life know what it is and why it's important to you, so that you can actually ask them to support you by helping to create space for you to do that when it's time to, versus, and this is something I've actually heard a lot of people, versus sort of being kind of gripey about people coming and interrupting you. And then I'll kind of push them on like, well, have you ever asked them not to? And it's like, well, no, I guess I never really told them I'm writing a book, please, like for the next 2 hours, unless it's really important, just leave me alone so I can focus. Never actually said that. I'm like, well, then, you know, maybe you should think about that. So I think social factors are something that people don't usually think of when it comes to setup, but I think it's really important, you know, letting your world know what you're doing and why it's important to you and how they can support you by kind of working with you to make space for you to do it. And for me, that looks like kind of being at home in a chair in my guest room with the door closed. Kind of, I get a little more of a Zen cave thing going on that way. But again, that's me. One of the other things that I think is an important part of setup, and I'll talk about what this looks like for me, and then Adam would love to hear from you what this looks like for you, is kind of, I don't know, systems and tools and the things that you have ready to go when you're ready to start writing, how you do your writing. When you have writing time is not the time to be going, oh, do I have paper, or do I even use paper? Like, what do I do to do my writing? So for me, I've got my files saved. I use Scrivener, and maybe we'll talk about resources and tools another time. So I've got my Scrivener project. I have it right on my desktop. And then the other thing that I have kind of set up that helps me get in my mental space really quickly is I have a playlist of music that the fantasy novel that I'm working on is heavily inspired by sort of East Asian, you know, Chinese and Japanese culture. So I have a fairly large playlist at this point of just really good flute music and various styles of traditional music from those cultures that I kick on. And it's a little psychological trick, but I always start with the same song in the playlist every time. It's on shuffle, but I always start with the same one. And I've done that enough times now that it kind of gives my brain a little mental cue that, oh, it's time to write. And I have my earbuds in and I'm hearing that kind of music, and it puts me in that groove. So that's one of the little kind of system things that I've personally developed that really, really helps me get off to the races, so that when I've got time to write and I sit down, within 5 or 10 minutes, I'm writing new words because I've got my bookmark right where I left off. I've got my music ready to just kick on, and I can kind of remember what I was doing last time and get going. So for me, that's a really important part of setup, so that I don't just sort of end up killing 10 or 15, 20 minutes every time I have writing time, just getting back up to speed again and remembering, wait, where is that file? Oh yeah, what was I writing about last time? And so on. Adam, what does that look like for you when you're getting ready to go, you're in the coffee shop, you're ready to get started? What are some of the kind of patterns or systems or tools that you have in place or that you utilize as part of your setup?
Well, yeah, I bought Scrivener too. And again, we will talk about that in a later video. Right now, I'm just more comfortable with Word. And so it's almost like I have to schedule a different time to learn Scrivener than writing time. So if I say this hour is for learning Scrivener, because that's not going to be part of my setup until I'm really, really comfortable with that program. And Absolutely. I understand it's supposed to be great, but there's nothing more frustrating than spending 2 hours of my writing time trying to learn Scrivener and then going home and going, man, I didn't write. I just was trying to learn this program. I want to highlight, I mean, my wife said to me last night that she'd been working with her coach, and she agreed with her coach that I must tell my husband now, I am now writing this book. So what Justin was saying about letting people in your life know that you are writing a book is so helpful. And I can't tell you how helpful it was to me as a husband to just be like, okay, so I'm glad that you're acknowledging that you're doing this, because I've thought that it was percolating in the back of her mind for a long time. Now it's, I mean, she posted a blog and got like 6 responses in a day that, yes, this outline is a book. You need to write this book. We want to read your book. But just articulating, hey, I'm going to write this book now. That's a project, and I'm so project oriented that it's something that clicked in my mind, like, oh, okay, so now you have a project. When you say, hey, I need this time, I need this space for this project, I'm going to be behind it because I want to see her write the book too. I mean, that's what I'm passionate about. The other thing that you were talking about, putting on Eastern, Chinese or Japanese music. I heard a guy on NPR one time talking about his setup for a novel that he wrote, where he actually, just the fact that you mentioned Japan reminded me of this, but he moved to Japan and lived in a hotel room where he was in an environment that was completely, had no North American pop culture. Actually, I think he was Scottish or English or something, but he was writing a period piece about Scotland from the 1970s. So what he did was he moved to Japan, where he could experience no British pop culture at all in the current day. And the only thing he did was listen to music, watch movies from Scotland in the 70s, era stuff only, in that hotel room for months. Now, we can't all do that because we're not, like we've said in other videos, we're not all professional writers where we're doing this full time and have the budget to just like move to Japan and buy a bunch of 70s Scottish movies or whatever,
Although Lord willing.
Sit and watch Starsky. Yeah, sit and watch Starsky and Hutch all day and go, yeah, 70s, baby. So I kind of want to end this, Justin, with sort of some coaching questions to give people a handle. And I would say, if you hear a coaching question from me in a video, take that as a cue, maybe to do a little journaling, since I'm not asking you that coaching question in person. When you've had your best writing session, what did it look like? Describe it in detail, paint yourself a picture. Think back to a time when you just cranked it out. Maybe you put down 3,000 words in an hour and a half, or 5,000 words in 3 hours, or whatever it was. Think back to what your environment was like, who knew you were there, or maybe nobody knew where you were at all. What were your relationships like to the environment? Who was around? Who wasn't around? What do you need? And just thinking, and just kind of take down like the most important pieces of it. And that gives you something to bring to our group to talk about, okay, this is where my setup, this is my ideal setup. Everybody has to have a different one. So all the stuff that we said about our setups, just throw it right out. Think back to the time when you had your best writing session and paint yourself a picture of that. And that'll give you a pretty good idea of where you need to be in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. Definitely encourage everyone to make the time to actually not just go, oh, yeah, that's an interesting question, then put it out of your mind, but get some paper or however you like to journal and process and really think that through, because I think there'll be some keys in there for helping to figure out your setup. And doing that, I think, is one of the most substantial sort of professional development investments you can make as a professional writer that's cheap and easy to figure out right away. That's one of the things that I love, is trying to find those key things that aren't dependent on anybody else. It doesn't cost a bunch of money. It doesn't take a bunch of time. Like, it's just a thing that you can decide to invest some effort into figuring out. And I promise you, if you do so, your productivity will increase and you'll see some results from it. So looking forward to talking about setup with all of you on the call and hearing what that looks like for you. And we will see you again in the next video.